I never thought the person standing beside me for 17 years would be the same person I needed to protect myself from. My name is Daniel Carter, and until that moment, I believed I understood my marriage better than anyone. Emily and I had built a life together that many people would consider stable. We owned a comfortable home outside Phoenix, Arizona, had savings for the future, and spent years creating a routine that felt dependable. We were not a perfect couple, but I believed we were a team. I worked hard running my small logistics company, often spending long hours managing clients, employees, and unexpected challenges. Emily handled many things at home and was always someone who thought ahead. She liked planning, organizing, and making sure we were prepared for whatever life brought us. For years, I admired that quality about her. I thought her careful nature balanced my tendency to focus on solving problems one at a time. Together, we made decisions about our home, our finances, and our future. At least, that was what I believed. Looking back, I can see there were small signs that something had changed between us. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that immediately made me question everything. It was little things that were easy to ignore. Conversations about money became shorter. Questions about our savings became more frequent. Emily started mentioning future plans that sounded different from the conversations we used to have together. I noticed the changes, but I convinced myself there was a simple explanation. After nearly 2 decades together, you learn to trust the person beside you. You assume you understand their intentions because you know their habits, their personality, and their heart. That assumption is what made the next discovery so difficult. One Tuesday morning, I was sitting in my office reviewing business expenses when I received a notification from our bank. At first, I expected it to be a normal update. I opened it without much thought, but within seconds, I realized something was different. There were financial activities connected to our shared savings that I did not recognize. I stared at the screen, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. My first emotion was not anger. It was confusion. I kept telling myself there had to be a reasonable explanation. Maybe Emily had forgotten to mention something. Maybe there was a misunderstanding. I wanted that to be true because the alternative was difficult to accept. The person connected to those decisions was not a stranger. It was my wife. The woman I had trusted with my future was making moves that affected both of us without including me in the conversation. That was the moment I realized this was not only about money. Money was just what revealed the deeper problem. The real issue was that somewhere along the way, Emily and I had stopped sharing parts of our lives with each other. I did not confront her immediately. I knew an emotional reaction would not solve anything. Instead, I decided to understand what was happening before making any decisions. I needed clarity. I needed the truth. Because after 17 years of marriage, the hardest thing to accept was not the possibility of losing savings. It was the possibility that I had been losing my connection with Emily long before I noticed. After discovering the unusual activity connected to our savings, I spent the next several days trying to understand what was really happening. I did not want to jump to conclusions because 17 years of marriage deserved more than a quick reaction based on suspicion. I kept reminding myself that there could be an explanation. There could be something I did not know. There could be details missing from what I had seen. But the more I looked into the situation, the more I realized that Emily had been making plans that I was not part of. That was the part that hurt the most. It was not the numbers on a screen. It was the feeling that I had somehow become a stranger in decisions that affected both of our lives. I started thinking about the months leading up to that moment. I remembered conversations that felt different. Emily had started asking more questions about what would happen if we separated. She brought up topics about finances, living arrangements, and future plans in ways that felt unusual. At the time, I thought she was simply being cautious. Emily had always been someone who prepared for possibilities. She liked having a plan. She liked knowing what came next. I respected that about her. But now, I wondered if those conversations had been signs that she was already preparing for a future without me. That thought was difficult to process. I was not angry because Emily wanted security. Everyone wants to feel safe about their future. What bothered me was that she had chosen to handle something important without trusting me enough to discuss it openly. I spent many nights sitting in my home office, looking at old photographs and remembering the life we had built together. There were pictures from vacations, family celebrations, and ordinary moments that seemed more meaningful than ever. I kept asking myself when we stopped feeling like partners. When did we start handling important parts of our lives separately instead of together? The truth was uncomfortable. Maybe this problem did not begin with the savings account. Maybe it started years earlier when we both became too busy managing responsibilities and forgot to check in with each other emotionally. That realization made the situation even more complicated because I could not simply blame Emily for everything. I had my own questions to answer. Had I been too focused on work? Had I assumed providing stability was enough? Had I overlooked the signs that Emily was feeling disconnected? Those questions stayed with me because I wanted to understand the entire picture, not just the part that made me feel hurt. Still, I knew I needed to be careful. If Emily was making decisions that could affect our future, I could not ignore it. At the same time, I did not want to create more damage by reacting emotionally. I decided to quietly organize the information I had and make sure I understood my situation completely. I wanted to have a calm conversation based on facts, not accusations. I wanted answers, not an argument. What I did not know was that Emily had already made plans of her own, and soon I would discover just how far ahead she had been thinking. The more I learned about the situation, the more I realized that Emily had been preparing for a future that I was not aware of. That discovery was difficult because it forced me to look beyond the financial details and face a much bigger question. How had two people who spent 17 years together reached a point where one person felt the need to make important decisions alone? I did not want to believe that our entire marriage had been built on a misunderstanding. I still remembered the years when Emily and I were truly a team. We supported each other through career changes, unexpected expenses, and the challenges that come with building a life together. There were countless moments when I knew I had married someone who cared about our future. That was why the situation felt so confusing. The person I was trying to understand was the same person I had trusted for almost 2 decades. I decided to look more closely at what had been happening. I reviewed our financial information, organized important documents, and tried to understand the timeline of Emily's decisions. I was not looking for a reason to attack her. I was trying to protect myself while also understanding her perspective. What I discovered was that Emily had been asking questions about separation and finances for longer than I realized. She had been thinking about possibilities I never knew existed. That information confirmed something I had already suspected. This was not a sudden decision. It was something she had been considering quietly for some time. The hardest part was accepting that while I was still trying to understand what was happening, Emily seemed to have already taken several steps forward. I felt like I was trying to catch up in a situation that involved both of us. But instead of reacting emotionally, I reminded myself that making a rushed decision would only make things worse. I needed to stay calm and think clearly. I needed to be prepared, not because I wanted conflict, but because I needed to make sure I was not ignoring reality. That was when I started taking careful steps to understand my options. I organized records, reviewed our shared responsibilities, and made sure I had a complete picture of our financial situation. For the first time in years, I stopped assuming that everything would work itself out. I started paying attention. During that process, I also began noticing something important about myself. I had spent so much time believing that a strong marriage meant trusting without question that I forgot trust also requires communication. Trust does not mean ignoring changes. It does not mean avoiding uncomfortable conversations. Real trust means both people feel safe enough to be honest with each other. I wondered if Emily felt like she had to make these plans because she believed I would not understand her concerns. That thought was painful because I did not want to be someone who made my wife feel unheard. But I also knew that understanding her feelings did not mean ignoring my own. Both things could be true at the same time. She could have fears and concerns, and I could still feel hurt by the way she handled them. That realization helped me approach the situation differently. I was no longer focused on proving that I was right. I was focused on being ready for whatever conversation came next. And soon, that conversation would happen, because Emily was about to realize that I knew much more than she expected. I knew the conversation with Emily could not be avoided forever. After spending days organizing information and understanding the situation, I realized that staying silent was no longer the right choice. I did not want to surprise her or create a bigger conflict. I wanted a conversation where both of us could finally be honest about what had been happening. So one evening, when we were both at home, I asked Emily if we could talk. She immediately noticed that something was different. There was a seriousness in my voice that told her this was not a normal conversation about daily responsibilities or routine plans. We sat at the kitchen table, the same place where we had shared countless meals, discussed family decisions, and talked about our future. But that night, the atmosphere felt completely different. I started calmly by explaining what I had discovered. I told her I knew there had been financial decisions made without my involvement. I expected many possible reactions, but what surprised me was the look on her face. For a moment, she seemed less defensive and more disappointed that the truth had finally come out. Emily asked how much I knew and why I had not confronted her sooner. I told her I needed time to understand everything before speaking because I did not want our first real conversation about the issue to become an argument. I wanted answers, not blame. That was when Emily finally admitted that she had been thinking about separation for some time. Hearing those words from my wife was difficult, even though part of me already suspected it. There is a difference between fearing something might be true and hearing someone you love confirm it. I felt a wave of sadness, not because I wanted to force her to stay, but because I realized how far apart we had become without either of us acknowledging it. Emily explained that she had felt uncertain about our relationship for a long time. She said she often felt like we were managing life together but not truly connecting anymore. She believed that preparing financially was the safest way to protect herself if things changed. Listening to her was painful, but it also helped me understand that this situation was more complicated than I originally thought. I had been focused on the financial decisions, but Emily had been focused on emotions she felt were ignored. At the same time, I shared my own perspective. I told her that the way she handled the situation made me feel excluded and betrayed. I explained that protecting herself should not have meant making decisions that affected both of us without a conversation. We both sat there realizing that we had been carrying different versions of the same story. Emily saw herself as someone preparing for uncertainty. I saw myself as someone blindsided by choices made behind my back. The truth was somewhere in the middle. Neither of us had handled everything perfectly. But for the first time in a long time, we were finally talking about the real issues instead of avoiding them. That conversation did not solve everything. It did not erase the hurt or instantly rebuild trust. But it revealed something important. The problem was never just about savings or finances. The real issue was that two people who once shared everything had slowly stopped sharing the things that mattered most. And now, we had to decide what came next. After that conversation with Emily, I realized that knowing the truth was only the beginning. For days, I had imagined that once we finally talked openly, everything would become clear. I thought understanding what happened would somehow make the situation easier. But the reality was more complicated. Sometimes the truth does not remove the pain. Sometimes it simply shows you where the pain has been hiding. Emily and I had spent years building a life together, but we had reached a point where we were both carrying feelings that the other person never fully understood. In the days after our conversation, we started having deeper discussions about how we got there. We talked about moments we had both overlooked, decisions we made without explaining them, and the ways we had slowly created distance between us. Emily told me that she had felt disconnected for a long time. She said she did not wake up one morning and decide that everything was over. Instead, it happened gradually through small moments when she felt unheard or uncertain about our future. Hearing that was difficult because I never wanted Emily to feel alone in our marriage. At the same time, I had to be honest about my own experience. I told her that I felt hurt because I believed we were supposed to face challenges together. I explained that preparing for a possible separation without including me made me question the trust we had built over 17 years. I did not want to control her choices, but I needed her to understand why her actions affected me so deeply. For the first time, we both stopped trying to defend ourselves and started listening. That was a major change because before that moment, every conversation about the situation felt like we were explaining our own side instead of trying to understand the other person's feelings. Emily admitted that she had focused so much on protecting herself that she did not think enough about how her decisions would make me feel. She said she was afraid of uncertainty and wanted to make sure she had a plan. I could understand that fear, even though I still wished she had trusted me enough to have that conversation earlier. I also admitted my own mistakes. I realized that I had spent years believing that working hard and providing stability meant I was doing everything I needed to do as a husband. But a marriage is not only built on responsibilities. It is built on emotional connection, honesty, and the willingness to make your partner feel included. I had been so focused on solving external problems that I did not always notice the emotional distance growing between us. That realization changed how I looked at everything. I stopped seeing the situation as a simple question of who was right and who was wrong. Instead, I saw two people who had both been struggling in different ways. Emily had been trying to protect herself. I had been trying to protect the life we built. We were both focused on security, but we were no longer creating that security together. The conversation did not magically repair our relationship, but it gave us something we had not had in a long time. It gave us honesty. And honesty was the first step toward deciding what our future would look like. The days after our honest conversation with Emily were some of the most uncertain moments of my life. For the first time in years, we were no longer pretending everything was fine. We had finally admitted that something between us had changed, but admitting a problem and solving a problem are two completely different things. There were still questions we needed to answer, and there were still feelings we needed to understand. What surprised me most was realizing that the biggest challenge was not deciding what would happen to our savings. The biggest challenge was deciding whether we could rebuild the trust that had slowly disappeared between us. Emily and I started having conversations that we should have had much earlier. We talked about our expectations, our fears, and the moments when we both felt alone in the marriage. I learned things about Emily that I never knew because I had never asked the right questions. She explained that for a long time, she felt like we were only managing responsibilities together. We paid bills, maintained the house, and handled daily routines, but we stopped making time to truly understand each other. She said she missed feeling like we were a team. Hearing that was difficult because I had always believed my actions showed how much I cared. I worked hard, protected our financial stability, and tried to make sure we had a comfortable life. But I realized that providing security was only one part of being a partner. A person can feel safe financially and still feel emotionally distant. That was a lesson I needed to accept. At the same time, Emily began to understand my perspective. She admitted that making important decisions without telling me created a feeling of betrayal. She said she had been so focused on preparing for uncertainty that she did not think enough about the impact her choices would have on me. She realized that protecting herself did not have to mean shutting me out. We both started seeing the situation differently. Instead of looking at each other as the source of the problem, we began looking at the habits and misunderstandings that brought us there. That shift was important because it allowed us to have conversations without constantly defending ourselves. I also made some changes in the way I handled my own emotions. Before this happened, I often kept stress to myself. I believed that being responsible meant handling problems quietly. I did not want to worry Emily or make her feel pressured. But I learned that silence can create distance just as easily as conflict can. Sharing concerns does not make a person weaker. It allows both people in a relationship to face challenges together. We started creating new ways to communicate. We discussed finances openly, made plans together, and stopped assuming that the other person already understood our thoughts. It felt strange at first because we had spent so many years relying on assumptions. But slowly, those conversations became easier. The trust we lost was not rebuilt in one day. It came back through consistency, honesty, and small moments where we showed each other that we were willing to change. Looking back, I realized that Emily and I were not only dealing with a financial conflict. We were dealing with years of unspoken emotions. The savings account was just the moment that revealed what had already been happening beneath the surface. And as painful as that realization was, it also gave us the opportunity to finally address the real problem. As Emily and I continued having honest conversations, I started realizing that the biggest change was not happening in our financial situation. It was happening in the way we looked at each other. For years, we had both believed we were doing what was best for our marriage. We simply had different ideas about what protecting our future meant. I focused on stability through hard work and careful planning. Emily focused on preparing for uncertainty and making sure she would be okay if things changed. The problem was not that either of us cared less. The problem was that we stopped sharing those thoughts with each other. That understanding changed the way I approached everything. I no longer wanted to prove that I had been right about the situation. I wanted to understand how we had reached that point and what we could learn from it. I realized that winning an argument would not repair a relationship. Understanding each other would. Emily and I started rebuilding trust through small, consistent actions. We created a new habit of discussing important decisions before they became problems. We talked about finances, future plans, and concerns that we might have previously kept to ourselves. Those conversations were not always comfortable, but they were honest. And honesty was something we had been missing. One of the hardest things for me to accept was that I had also contributed to the distance between us. I had spent years believing that being a good husband meant carrying responsibilities without complaint. I thought keeping stress to myself was a way of protecting Emily. But I learned that keeping someone out of your worries can make them feel disconnected. A marriage is not supposed to be one person carrying everything while the other person simply benefits from the results. It is supposed to be two people facing life together. Emily also began making changes. She admitted that she had allowed fear to influence her decisions. She wanted to feel prepared, but she did not realize that moving forward without including me damaged the trust between us. She started sharing her thoughts earlier instead of waiting until she already had a plan. That small change meant a lot because it showed me she was choosing partnership over independence. The interesting thing was that the more we communicated, the less important the original conflict became. The savings were still important. Our future was still important. But we finally understood that the relationship behind those things mattered even more. Money could be managed. Plans could be adjusted. But rebuilding trust required patience and effort from both of us. There were moments when I wondered if things would ever feel normal again. Then I realized that maybe normal was not what we needed. The version of our marriage before this happened had problems we were not willing to acknowledge. Instead of trying to go back, we needed to create something healthier moving forward. We were learning how to be partners again, not just people sharing responsibilities. Looking back, I realized the situation gave us something unexpected. It forced us to stop avoiding difficult conversations and start being honest about what we needed from each other. The hardest moments in a relationship can reveal the areas that need attention the most. For Emily and me, this experience showed us that trust is not something you build once and keep forever. It is something you protect through every conversation, every decision, and every choice to include the person beside you. As time passed, Emily and I began to understand that rebuilding our relationship required more than just solving the problem that started everything. We had already discussed the financial situation, shared our feelings, and acknowledged the mistakes we both made. But trust is not rebuilt through one conversation. It is rebuilt through the choices people make afterward. That was something I had to learn. I used to think the hardest part of our situation was discovering that Emily had made plans without me. But the real challenge was learning how to move forward after that discovery without allowing resentment to control the future. There were moments when I still remembered how surprised and hurt I felt when I first found out. Those feelings did not disappear instantly. But every time they returned, I reminded myself that understanding the past was more important than staying trapped in it. Emily was also learning the same lesson. She understood that even though her intentions came from fear and uncertainty, the way she handled the situation affected my ability to trust her. She began making an effort to include me in conversations before decisions were made. She stopped assuming she had to figure everything out alone. That change showed me that she was not only listening to my words, but also understanding why those words mattered. One of the biggest changes in our marriage was the way we handled difficult topics. Before everything happened, we often avoided conversations because we thought avoiding conflict would keep things peaceful. We both believed we were protecting the relationship by not bringing up certain concerns. But we eventually realized that silence does not always create peace. Sometimes silence simply allows problems to grow unnoticed. We started having regular conversations about our future, our goals, and the things that worried us. Some conversations were easy, while others required patience and humility. But every honest conversation brought us closer because we were no longer guessing what the other person was thinking. I also began seeing Emily in a different way. Before, I focused on the decision she made and the impact it had on me. Over time, I started seeing the person behind that decision. I saw someone who had been worried, someone who wanted security, and someone who did not know how to express those feelings in a healthy way. That did not mean I ignored what happened. It meant I could understand her without losing sight of my own experience. Emily began seeing me differently as well. She realized that my desire for stability was not about controlling everything. It came from wanting to protect the life we had built together. We both discovered that many of our disagreements came from the same place. We cared deeply about our future, but we expressed that care in completely different ways. Looking back, I realized that the situation changed the way I viewed marriage. I once thought a strong relationship meant avoiding major problems. Now I understand that a strong relationship is built by knowing how to handle problems when they appear. Challenges do not define a marriage. The response to those challenges does. Emily and I were not trying to erase what happened. We were learning from it. We were creating a relationship where honesty mattered more than comfort and where teamwork mattered more than being right. The experience that once felt like the beginning of the end became the reason we finally started building something stronger. When I look back at everything that happened, I realize the most important lesson was not about money, savings, or protecting myself from an unexpected situation. It was about understanding what happens when two people stop truly communicating. Emily and I spent years building a life together, but somewhere along the way, we both became focused on managing responsibilities instead of maintaining our connection. The financial conflict was the moment that forced us to recognize something we had both ignored for too long. We were not just dealing with a disagreement about finances. We were dealing with years of conversations we avoided, feelings we never expressed, and assumptions we made about each other. The experience changed the way I viewed trust. Before everything happened, I thought trust meant believing that the person beside you would always make the right choice. Now I understand that trust is much more than that. Trust requires communication, honesty, and the willingness to face uncomfortable conversations before they become bigger problems. Emily and I learned that protecting a relationship does not mean avoiding difficult topics. It means having the courage to discuss them together. There was a time when I believed being prepared meant making sure I was never caught off guard. I thought staying ahead of problems was the best way to protect myself. That mindset helped me handle the financial situation, but it also taught me something unexpected. The strongest protection in a marriage is not a backup plan. It is knowing that both people feel safe enough to be honest with each other. Emily and I were fortunate that we were able to have those difficult conversations before making decisions that could permanently change our lives. Not every relationship reaches that point, and I understand that every situation is different. But for us, the moment when everything seemed broken became the moment when we finally started paying attention. We stopped trying to prove who was right and started trying to understand what was wrong. We learned to ask questions instead of making assumptions. We learned to listen instead of preparing our next response. Most importantly, we learned that love alone is not enough to maintain a strong relationship. Love needs effort. It needs honesty. It needs two people choosing to show up even when things feel uncomfortable. Today, I do not look at that difficult period as only a painful memory. I see it as a turning point. It showed me parts of my marriage that needed attention and parts of myself that needed improvement. Emily and I are not the same people we were before everything happened. In some ways, that is a good thing. We became more aware, more intentional, and more willing to communicate. The experience reminded me that every relationship faces moments of uncertainty. The difference is what people choose to do when those moments arrive. They can allow fear and silence to create more distance, or they can choose honesty and understanding. For Emily and me, the hardest conversation we ever had became the beginning of a better one. The situation that once made me question everything eventually taught me the value of something far more important than money. It taught me the value of trust, partnership, and choosing to move forward with greater understanding.